Evet, değerli konuklar.
Yes, esteemed guests, in today's session, we have a very interesting topic. Our topic is protectionist measures in the steel industry and strategies to counter them. This is very interesting because there are an increasing discourses on protectionism and protectivist policies. I don't know, maybe it is due to the increase on world trade volume. As a parallel to this volume increase, it may be normal to react against this increase. We have many valuable panelists here, and they are expert in this field, and they have very much experiences. But I am less expert in this issue. I hope at the end I will be very happy to learn about the applications and the latest developments will be learned a lot. And right now, I want to introduce you our panelists from Tirade Resources Company. He is the partner and Istanbul office director, Bulent Hacıoglu. Welcome, Mr. Bulent. And Steel Pipe Manufacturers Association General Secretary Mr. Mehmet, welcome. And Turkish Steel Association General Secretary Veysel Yayan, welcome once again. Thank you. If you want, we can start with you, Mr. Hacıoglu, in order to enter into the issue a little bit. We have known you very well. If there comes problems, we know your valuable solutions help us. I'm not very familiar to this subject, so as a person like that, I sometimes get confused. There is the anti-dumping tax and also price undertaking and voluntary agreements. So all of these actually make us more complicated. We all know that these are some measures, but I don't know what is the difference. In order to enter into the subject a little bit, can you please enlighten us about the differences among those different terms? Yes. When it comes to customs tax, it is very much used by every country, and these are not under the category of measures. In the customs, if you are a member of due trade, you have to determine your lowest tax base. So is there any difference among the countries? No, there is no differences, but there are some standards and exemptions of the custom union members and European Union countries. Why these do customs are important? Why some dumpings are not eradicated and the tax is not increased? When the countries commit on bound duties, they cannot increase that threshold. So there's a very frequently used term such as anti-dumping. Very frequently we can see this. There's a difference among these terms. In anti-dumping inquisitions, there is a difference between normal value and exported value. We have to make assessments on the normal value definition. Normal value price is the internal selling price. Normally there is a misunderstanding. Dumping is the undervalue of the selling. No, it is not the case. It is the lower than internal market sale price. Sometimes we may not sell this kind of prices. In the petroleum pipeline, we had the same situation. In Turkey, we don't have these sales of many pipeline manufacturers, and there is also fictive internal market taking the roots from the cost. And second, compensatory duties. In compensatory duties, there are some subsidies and incentives. The advantages are tried to be eliminated of those subsidies and incentives. There are some limitations coming from the steel industry, But in spite of this, we can see some incentives. Why? Because it is something coming from the United States creativity. For instance, when you look at natural gas prices, they are under normal, simple, equivalent or alternative prices, or coal price. It is less than its equivalent price. So this is the evolution, and sometimes this method is also inquired. Last but not least, there is a safeguard protectionist method. We all know in the safeguard method, anti-dumping and compensatory tax. This is something different from these two. It addresses at all countries. As you all know, anti-dumping and subvention, in this kind of investigations, some countries are addressed. Safeguard method is only for some exceptional duties. When there is an increase on import and when there is a very serious harm on the local producers, we are providing these safeguard measures. So this is the difference among these three important taxes. So you said that in summary, customs duty can be applied to countries, all countries, if you don't have any bilateral special agreement. Anti-dumping is something different from that, and compensatory duty is offered when there is a subvention or subsidy or incentive. And you said that at the last part there is a safeguard. When there is an import flow to the country can apply at that method. So this is also a right. Yes, this is a right, because at the end you are trying to protect the local producers. Yes, but the criteria for safeguard is higher than normal, and also for the implementations, anti-dumping can be applied for 5 years, but safeguard can only be applied for 4 years, and it can be extended only one time. So maximum it has 8 years. And when it comes to local producers, when they are at threat, when this situation occurs, applying at this method, about the process, can you give a little bit information? Yes, from the process perspective, I can give some information to you. Local production, 25% of the local production representatives should make some complaints. Minimum 25% of the local production representatives could make complaints, and when there are some obvious reasons, the companies or officials can open up some ex officio inquisitions. And we know that as a result of the assessment of the complaint, the opening of that is published on official gazette, and anti-dumping criteria is sent to the parties. Sometimes there could be more exporters, sometimes there can be multiple exporters. So if this is the case, authority looks at the largest ones, the biggest ones, 1, 2, 3, or 4. There is no limitation in terms of number. They look at the producers and they take the average out of their importation. And the information which is stated there is not limited. There could be some additional questions, and each inquisition, each inquiry, the authorities, ministries can look at the information and they can inspect and audit the information. And with the pre-decision measure taken process is initiated. Excluding the exceptions, pre-decisions can be the trigger point, and before 4 months, transitory process is not applied, and there is a critical circumstances situation. This is applied by the United States. If the exportation is excessively increasing and the criteria is 15%, it is the period pre and post 3 months of the inquiry, and retrospectively anti-dumping can be applied, and also compensatory tax can be applied, so pre and post 3 months of the inquisition period. But this is something very rare. In the construction steel example, we had the same thing, but in the ICT, we have seen the decision was against the request. In the last 2 years, we have observed some implementations against China. Generally, the expected decision is temporary decision. During the temporary decision, measures can only be started to implemented if the measures are taken after the temporary decision. The objections of the parties are taken into consideration. The absolute measure is 2% in the group which Turkey is included in anti-dumping. Up to 2% it is expected as 0, and in compensatory tax it is 1%. Of course, there is also the loss part of it, but maybe we can talk about it later on. And minimum 5 years of enactment and being into the implementation time. So after 5 years, companies can make requests on administrative revisions, and sometimes they make some objections. The later, the successors of the company can also request different exportation inquisitions, and they are also revised and they can get their margins. At the end of the 5th year, there is the final revision meeting. It is the decision process to stop the measure or continue the taken measures to be implemented still. When we look at the United States, these are renewed each 5 years period. Okay, if I'm not mistaken, you said that they are taken for 5 years period and they are revised each 5 years. So about this anti-dumping tax, is it put on for the countries or on the basis of companies? Both for countries and for companies. So if it is on the basis of country, when there is non-existence of a company can make requests on revisions. Okay, let's continue with you, Mr. Yayla. There is something else which makes me complicated as well. When we look at liberal economy and market economy in the world, there is the one country that comes to our mind. But when it comes to preventive measures, we also see the same country. Everybody, I think, assumes what I'm talking about. We are talking about United States of America. In our country, what can you say about the steel producers? There are many lawsuits and inquiries for our steel makers. What can you say about this? What can you say? Is there something wrong here? Or our producers and industrial men, are they also sensitive as American producers in Turkey's market?
Well, as a I have taken a list of dumping investigations that were opened against Turkey, and both in the United States, both in terms of long products and in terms of other materials. They have opened a lot of investigations against Turkey, lawsuits against Turkey, and while these lawsuits are opened, we cannot complain about this. We cannot go against it. But the things that they say are quite disturbing. The hypothesis, the assumption that they make are quite disturbing. Of course, yes, the decision was made. But then, if they think that they are right, this is acceptable too. But just like Bulent mentioned in his example, with some certain methods in gases, and if it was said that they take the gas and oil in a cheaper price. If they put forward certain assumptions and hypotheses with regards to their righteous rights, then they will it's a country with a great inputs. And also in Erdemir executive, there are some certain people working in the public organization, public institution, and who also work in the Erdemir, and they, just like they give a cheaper price, no one in this room can say that the tax is first 37% and then 15%. If you accept this, this is not, of course, acceptable. In the United States, for example, the United States is quite notorious about this. The protective measures are deeper and more challenging, and you can't come to a conclusion all in sudden. So there was a decision given in 2011. It was mentioned that I am making a wall, and per trade I will give a profit of $100, $80, and this was like a promotion. This was like an incentive. So for the EU, this was a protective measure. And against that protective measure, we were highly surprised, and the EU is not that much notorious, in fact. Just like it was mentioned, they have more regulations and rules. But in the iron and steel sector, when I entered into this sector, I know that ever since they have opened many lawsuits, it was lifted after on, such as on flat products and long products, etc. But as these lawsuits and investigations continues, this has terrorized the sector and the producers and manufacturers. You don't have to go further. In 2011, our capacities are flat capacities are increasing, and not main. We thought that we were not in need of increasing our imports. And in the EU, people kept asking me, "What is happening, Mr. Yayan? The capacity is increasing, and would this flat producers enter into Turkey and so on?" And what I explained to them is that this is going to stay in Turkey. Why is it going to? It is not necessarily going to be in the EU? But I didn't think that they were going to ask for a meeting specifically about this topic. And what happened in the end was that our capacities were opened and increased, and the EU, the export of the EU in terms of flat products have doubled. And in 22nd of September, a few months ago, we have been in a meeting in abroad. We had Başak Hanım and Mr. Uğur, and we told them that your products in the Eurostat, according to the statistics of Eurostat, we see that in an X country in the EU towards the Y country or Z country are selling a product to 500 euro, but you are selling the same product to Turkey for 400 euro. There is $100 of difference, and they were shocked. They couldn't say and tell anything, respond to anything. They said that we asked, "Is there any kind of a mistake in the statistics?" No, but then we asked further, but they said that they are working on it, and they are quite shocked and surprised about these facts, and we are expecting your reactions too with regards to this topic. This is what we're faced with. As an iron and steel sector, we are not that notorious against the anti-dumping. But when we are in a danger, this is not a method that we use, even if when we are in a danger. When we were having, before the meeting, I was talking to my colleague, and we sometimes talk about the free market. I'm in a free market. I am pro-free market, but we have an establishment, and when we found this establishment, we include manufacturers, our debt included, and according to the rules, according to the regulations, our organizations must be working, and with that for profit, they should be able to continue with their activities. If there is something contrary, this is disturbing. We cannot resort to protective measures at once. But if these disturbing situation increase, We have to take some certain measures, or else these problems will be indispensable. Thank you. And Veysel also have talked about me during his panel. Thank you. But I think he's right. Just like Eurofair representative, when he was asked the question and compared to the USA, he said that these kinds of operations are not the same as in the USA, and he said that the decisions are taken according to the rules and accordingly. But I know that Eurofair is quite fragile and sensitive about this topic. They have their discussions for long hours. It takes a long time, but in the end, they put some certain pressure. It is pro-pressuring these kinds of incentives and enterprises. So, Mr. Zeren, just like Veysel mentioned, within this year, we have had some certain reason and taxes added as a result of the United States. And can you please give us a detail about this topic? And also, can you also tell us whether there was an investigation opened by Canada? Yes, it did. Well, let me explain. We started our exports with the United States since 1985, and we have been battling with these topics, with regards to these topics, especially about these products, that the earlier mentioned products. And the United States have taken certain measurements. And when we go over these rates, for example, they have kept these rates into a minimum level. But as of 2003, they have opened another investigation, both about anti-dumping and also compensatory taxes. And they have taken zero taxes, and this was this was the firm that have done the most exports. But we have a very interesting situation in the end. Our company had a margin of 15.89%. And with a very interesting reason, they have taken this decision about the raw material. And as a result, this was a firm that was under the control of the government, and as a result, the products of subvention, and they have taken such a decision about the subventions, and this is a very interesting situation. In the past months, there was another investigation opened on the pipes, and they have again given the same reason, the same justification. And this is highly important, and we need to get rid of these, do away with all these issues. We have had our visits, and we put this investigation and this topic to the World Trade Organization and ask for help. And we believe that they are going to help us about this issue. And as for OCTJ, we had another investigation in Canada about anti-dumping. And on the 3rd of December, a decision will come up, and we're expecting for the decision. We're waiting for the decision. So isn't this a funny issue, a funny topic, like a subvention, a subsidy by the state have been taken, and then they give a different price to the customers? Can't we give the customers with a lower price? Well, this oil investigation, it was a highly interesting investigation, both in terms of construction and in oil prices. As for me, what I've seen is that these were the investigations that have been put a great pressure by the United States government. Every congressman, for example, during this period of time, used to, or every policymaker used to send a letter about the measurements that need to be taken on the imports. Unfortunately, these kinds of implementations are not prominent, are not common And this has came up, I believe that this has came up as a result of political pressure, because there was a similar case in the anti-dumping investigation too, as they have talked about the profit margin as a similar issue, and every country, for example, has its profits rate, but in that country, the profit, we need to take the profit in that specific country, and we need to take that rate into consideration. But for the implementation in Turkey, the profit affected Turkey greatly. We cannot think of a margin, profit margin with a 35%, for example. And this was put into based on some legal reasoning justification somehow. But as far as I followed, the investigation in the Court of International Trade went to an appeal, and it is waiting to be amended. The decision is waiting to be amended. But like you said, this kind of a decision, such as sending the cladding to giving a price with a lower rate, with a lower price, is not something common, and it's very interesting. Let's talk about injury. When we translate it into Turkish, do we say that this is a loss? When we say injury, are we talking about profit loss? Well, not exactly. This is a very crucial topic, but this is not only about subvention or the anti-dumping only. In order to take a certain measure, we need to prove that there is an anti-dumping and a subvention, but at the same time, the complainant who makes the complaint should give an evidence that it has lost, it's been under harm, a profit loss, but it has to show it as an evidence. But of course, both in terms of subvention calculations and anti-dumping calculations, this is a mathematical calculation, and this has a scientific side. And the calculation of loss is quite subjective, especially this is highly abused by the developed countries. When you look at the laws, for example, there are some certain parameters. It's not only about the heaviness, it's also about the sales, production, manufacturing, employment, investment. There are 12 criteria, and you need to go over them one by one in order to come up with a decision and calculation. But of course, when they do this, they don't really establish a certain framework. And when they, for example, make a profit of 40%, and when they show something else, they say that they have experienced a loss, but they don't necessarily have to experience a loss. A firm doesn't necessarily have to show the evidence that they have a loss, they have experienced a loss, but it has to be in line with the import, and they need to show that their situation has deteriorated. But then the import effect will be perceived, should be perceived in a negative way, right? Yes. For example, let me give a name, Nucor. They make a profit with 40%, but as a result of the export that we made, their profit decreases into 35%. Is this called an injury in the global market condition? There is no company who makes a profit of 40%. Well, yes, although this is something common that we see generally, this is not something objective. They don't look at the world profits. There are two parameters that they pay attention to, and these are the volume of the trade, how the trade is being developed and improved, and how the import makes the local producers lose, how they lose. So if they cut the prices, for example, they cannot make a reality out of it. So if there is a great tonnage if there is a great market loss, then they shape the box accordingly. All right. In fact, another important question is this. In here, let's assume that let's take the steel producers into consideration, and they are doing an export. to the United States. Based on your experiences, what are the things that we should be paying attention to? What kind of measures should they be taking? In fact, not everyone is quite informed about this. They don't have that much of a knowledge about these topics. But in these kinds of investigations, when we meet, when we encounter these kinds of investigations, what we come across most is the thought that the United States or the companies have opened an investigation, then they're going to make a justification. For example, Dominican Republic opened an anti-dumping investigation too. These kinds of things happen. There are these countries open investigations too, but you shouldn't be accepting the situation all at once. When you look at the parameters, the two most important things are the export and import prices. It has two legs, in fact. And in many markets, you give a price, market price, when you do an export or an import. But the prices that you give to the products and the timing of these prices in the anti-dumping can cause great differences and changes. For example, when we go over the administrative side, there are great analyses made about this topic. But when you do this export and shift the time from April to May, great changes happen. So if you can't, unmeasurable things, in fact, are hard to measure and are hard to follow. And they should be following these measurements greatly. And I believe that Turkey has achieved this greatly. When there was an investigation against construction iron in 1995, there was a dumping of 41%. And in the investigation that was opened last year, it was 0%. So in 1997, for example, there were some margins that was 10%, and then it decreased down to 0 in 2006. So without making a profit, you can always, without making great sales, you can always gain some margins. But this is a very complicated issue, and there should be some people who are experts, and they make their own rules, and it has its own regulations, internal regulations, and all the people in this field should be able to know about their rights. So they are sometimes faced with a lot of attacks, and some people in the United States, for example, can be very aggressive, and they can make pages of comments, and they can put allegations that you have made fraud. So they're not shy about making such allegations, and they put a lot of money, such as $2 million, and this is public. This is open to public, and they give money. They spend a lot of money on the lobbying activities. So you need to be able to follow all these developments, and you need to see what is going on, and you need to come up with a tangible. They need to come up with a tangible evidence in order to open these investigations. But as far as I've understood, compared to the past, I think people are doing their homework much better, right? Yes, like I said, in the investigation on Standard Pipe, it was 14%, and now it is 3% in those firms. So the sectors and the companies have improved themselves greatly. As far as I understand, the countries don't have the same standards and the implementations. I think there are some divergences or differences. Can you give an example of these differences in terms of these approaches, different approaches? Well, the basis is the anti-dumping agreement, which is which consists of 35 pages. But the implementation of these agreements, of this agreement, is different. For example, since 1994, the United States have been implementing anti-dumping implementations, but the case that has the widest jurisprudence, of course, we see some surprises, but United States is a different country compared to the others. We have seen 35 countries that opened files against Turkey. There are very different implementations, and every country has its own interpretation of these rules. Does it have a political content? Yes, of course. All right. Veysel, as far as I remember, in 2009, I might remember wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was in 2009 in the United States, Buy American law was entered into force. And we have talked a lot about this topic, and we wanted to see how this law was. And this was about the inability to supply or procure the material, and besides that, the institutional buildings and all the materials that are used, the steel materials, had to be used by the country. So isn't this an unfair implementation? If not, in the difficult condition of this sector, can a similar implementation be implemented in somewhere else? As far as I know, that agreement, that law dates back to even before 2009. But in the defense, during the times of defense industry, I think this dates back to 1940s. But of course, this is not. This is against the free market economy. But there are those countries that commonly follow these agreements and these laws and implementations, and there are different approaches with regards to this. Let's assume that Turkey entered by Turkish into force. Then, for example, Turkey is looking for a local company, or the public are looking for 51 local support in order to assume that this is a local product. And these things are getting even more common. So this is like a sickness, a contaminating sickness. This is growing and disseminating all around the world, and then the other countries take protective measures against it. There are some certain similar implementations. There can be some certain implementations in the EU in the future, because in the EU, they have a plan to safeguard the steel sector. And the academicians and also columnists state that, do this. Steel is a dirty sector, and in the developing countries and the Asian countries, when they transfer it, we fall into this trap. Why are we producing steel? Isn't it better if we import steel? Then we won't see these dirty environmental effects. But this is never the case, because the United States and the EU are they see the steel sector, the industry, as a backbone. If you import the steel, you cannot industrialize. This is their mentality. And with this thought, they are trying to, they take precautions, they take measurements in order to encourage and disseminate the steel sector, in their countries. You have to have a certain understanding in your own country, and you have to safeguard this in your own country. But this is not. We have to accept the fact that this is not about free markets, free trade markets. So when we are talking about unfair hindering, getting away with the unfair competition. But if the steel users pay more through import, they have to pay more And just like you, the costs, the most part of the costs will be uncompetitive in the export markets. Am I wrong? No, you're correct. In fact, there should be protective measures, but we need to discuss how we should put the protective measures. Just like, Veysel has given example on the United States and the EU. I think there are some laughings in the room, so I think I have made some wrong points or different point. Well, when we look at the implementation in the United States, there is no customs union, a zero customs union. When there's a threat from China, the United States make 90% of taxes, and again, and blocks it. But the implementational issues, problems in Turkey is something different. When you want to protect a sector, when you implement customs union, which is customs tax, which is around 9%, the sectors that use it are having difficult times to compete as a result of these taxes. Right now, there is a 9%, 10% tax, and as a result, according to the world markets, the prices are high, and this is quite apparent. And when there is an order coming from abroad, you have to respond to the orders very fastly. And when you do that, the products, for example, when you want to purchase the same product from domestic markets, and if the price is higher, you incline to the foreign countries. If not, if you're going to procure the material in 3-4 months, then you miss the chance to have that material. Our export indirectly is highly and critically have an impact, affected, but in a negative way. For example, from abroad, we procure raw materials in a different condition. But when we have agreements with certain countries, even under taxation agreements, then you have to make a compensatory tax. And this is an additional cost. Can you please repeat that? When you have the raw material, you, for example, produce it, you manufacture it, and you export, let's assume, when you send it to Israel under free trade agreement, you have to pay 10% of tax. And this is a discrepancy, a contradiction. You can see threats from various countries. For example, nowadays we have a threat from China. It is the country is also a threat for steel sector. And if we have to take protective measures such as subvention, if China is making a subvention sales, you have to make a compensatory tax against it. Isn't there compensatory tax from China? No. The customs taxes against all countries are 0%, and it is unprotective. And these taxes 20 years ago were lifted 20 years ago. And the lifting of these taxes were an advantage for the sector. Yet, it has reached to a competitive level. For example, we have a 10% of import, and the 45% can be exported to abroad. But this protection, just like Veysel Bey defends, and he in fact claims that there should be increases in it. In the steel sector, I believe that it is damaging, because as a result of this protective measure, the sector is not paying attention to export then, and it is more inclined to the import. And now the export is $1 billion. But we have a target, 2023 targets, and the target of Turkey in 2023 is $15 billion. So Turkey has to make this export 15 times more within that period of time. Let's hope they can make it. Thank you, Bulent. When you take a decision on anti-dumping, dumping, do you take steel producers into consideration? Generally, no. Many countries have anti-dumping implementations, but while having these implementations, what we call downstream users, the importers and their economic situation are not taking into attention or consideration. The only exception is in the EU. There's a section which is called community interest, and in every topic they take a decision, they go over all of the criteria, and it has to be an interest, a criteria interest for the public welfare, and they decide the results of the public welfare, and they review it. But the EU is an exceptional point, an exceptional case at this point, because the other countries don't implement the same conditions or issues. So, for example, there was a suspension agreement, and this was lifted. And is this a threat? Could this pose a threat to Turkey towards us? Could it put a pressure? Could the Russian producers put pressure in Turkey's markets? Of course, I believe that it would have an effect. Well, there are complementary taxes. No, I mean there is an obstacle right now of the export of Russia towards the USA, and there are now taxes. But well, Russia and Ukraine have their own problems. They are dealing with their own problems, and their situation, even though temporary, I don't believe that it would affect the markets, because there are other markets who try to enter into the world market with a lower price, such as China. And like I said before, things are changing gradually. The Russians, the Ukrainians are trying to find, and they are in fact finding, the prices where they can compete. But this is not a threat. I mean, this, out of my experiences, I don't think that this is a threat, an inclination threat. The implementation, for example, while we see this implementation, we see reactions from the EU, but they said that they take protective measures against the market or the companies that are unable to enter into the USA but try to enter into the EU. But these kinds of changes and inclinations take time. As you know, China's entry into the market have taken years, so they were unable to disseminate in our population, towards our culture, society. So they have always entered and made themselves accepted with $20–30 more expensive in addition. But I believe that it's going to take some certain time. We have limited time now. We're out of time. So regarding this very issue, what will be the challenges that we will see and encounter in 2015? And if we have time left, I will try to take questions from the room. What kind of challenges do you think we might experience in 2015 as Turkish exporters? Well, in the world, in the steel sector and the structural problems in the steel sector, when we think of these volumes, I know that we will keep having these dumping investigations, and 2/3 of these anti-dumping investigations are in the category of metals and steel. And the producers, for example, will try to think of their own markets. And these kinds of trade policies, are one of the measurements that they pay attention to and they put priority to. When you go back to 20 years, they were always talking about the anti-dumping investigations and problems in the United States. But with the emerging countries, developing countries, we see that these kinds of implementations are implemented there. For example, Moroccan, Australian investigations. In fact, Australia is a developed country, but countries such as Philippines, Indonesia, we see dumping investigations. And this is looking from a positive side, from an optimistic side. This means that this provides you the opportunity to have a competitive environment. With Turkey, we had Mexico in the consideration, and they had between 57-67% of dumping implementation and investigation. And this is not something that you want to experience in your life, but you sometimes have the opportunity against your competitors. Well, sometimes when we get taxes, we become happy because we eliminate Mexico then. Well, in our sector, in the steel sector, there are investigations opened about the EU and the USA. For example, line pipes investigation, the lawsuit that was opened in the United States, which is likely to come to a conclusion next year, and which I hope we won't see any negative decision, will come to an end. The other countries also open investigations a few times in a year. Our exports decreased, for example, a few years ago, but now we experience some growth. All right, thank you, Veysel. In terms of dumping and protective measures, the reasons, I believe that there will be some decreases in 2015. In our region, we had certain problems such as Iraq, Syria, Egypt, and as a result of such problems, because of the war conditions, a trade finds its way. A trade always finds its way. Although the trades and the exports declined by 80%, still it got back to the normal. So you're saying that our trade is quite dynamic, right? Yes. Regarding these investigations, although it is going to decrease the needs, the requirements, because the EU's approach is more bureaucratic, and it bases its approaches, and it takes its step under certain evidence. And the USA has opened some certain investigations, and I don't think there's even more is needed. So I believe that 2015 will be a more refreshing year for Turkey, and the gaps will be decreased. And when the frog was walking on the water, it didn't have that much of an effect in the beginning. So as for the scrap, I believe that there will be a certain balance, and it will contribute to the balance of scrap and iron ore. So they're going to compensate it gradually within years, and that kind of a structure will be emerged. Our sector is a learning organism. It is continuously learning, and through early warning mechanisms, just like Bulent has given example to, we do not make the same mistakes. So we don't fall to the same mistakes over and over again. So those who open the same investigation over and over again would rather take this thing into consideration. We are not making the same mistake, so therefore this is nothing but irritating us. All the lawsuits opened against Turkey by the USA have irritated Turkey a lot, and we don't know whether this is the case or not, but this was written there. But we hope that, and we expect the United States to be, warned and to take more precautions and measurements. But I don't think this will be the case. Every country, everyone is scared of China's attitude and behavior. We have always been afraid, but as of 2003, steel sector, in my opinion, have been more profitable, especially with the especially thanks to our northern neighbors, because we were under a lot of pressure in the past, and now they have taken a decision to make more investments. But as of 2008, they have regressed. They have taken their pressure back. But with the capacity level of China, we had an effect, a boomerang effect, and there is now a transversion, a regression, and this is what I believe. Well, do you have any questions? We are open for 1 or 2 questions, or not, we will end the session. I'd like to thank all the speakers and also SteelOrbis for organizing such a great organization and event, and I'm quite thankful for them. Iron and steel is a very important topic, but this is an ongoing fight. There are 2 groups fighting, not only in Turkey but also abroad in the world. The capacity, the established capacity, is 4.5 million. And also the raw materials have developed around 1993, 1994, but depending on the bits, things can change. Also in the automotive, when you can't take the fact that the galvanized, the plates, the sheet metals are used, we're talking about 4.5 million established capacity. My question is this: when we were unable to establish customs, establish educational customs, specialty customs, but you need to find a balance, but this is a very transparent topic that you should be discussing inside. Also, just like our legal representative mentioned, we have 3 functions such as pricing, periodical material, periodical amounts, and materials. For example, in the Thrace, they have established the specialty customs, and they were able to import 365 cars. I was there, I have seen it, but Turkey, in my opinion, needs to take precautions. Our Chinese speaker, for example, our Chinese representative, or they may say that they have the pricing such as 65, and the other person says 90 as a price, sets the price as 90. Everyone looks at it differently. What Turkey needs to do is to take a short-term precaution, at least in order to get the industry from the recession period. And the debtors, the need to come to common ground in order to achieve this. And the specialty customs are playing great role in order to achieve it. And maybe the iron ore or in the furnaces, they can, the people working on this field could have their meetings and come to a common ground. Everyone in the sector is going through a difficult time. Erdemir, for example, may be producing the ores, but if China continues or the neighboring continues, they are gonna have to regress their prices to a certain point, because the the ore producers are going to go through difficult times too. So what I'm wondering is this: what can be done with regards to this issue?
Hiçbir tedbir almadan
This is not a very comfortable environment. I'm not saying that we don't have that perception in steel sector, because this is not a valid perception, understanding in steel sector. We have to be doing what we are doing in the future, actually. We have to decrease the input costs, and investments should be also taken into the consideration very seriously. In the beginning of Erdemir's presentation, in Başak Hanım's presentation, he said $30 billion, $30 million. And this equivalent R&D work has been done, and it shows us that we are concerned about the situation. So each and every institution is seeking for the answers, what to do. And I know that they have allocated their millions of dollars to find the answers. Kardemir did the same thing, and also other companies did the same thing. And very recently, with the Ministry of Industry, we visited all steel facilities, and we have observed something, that there are relatively comfortable facilities, and these facilities are producing added value products. They are not making small calculations. In the previous SteelOrbis conference in Ankara, Ayşen Hanım was there. She is not with us. She says that we are trying to be good at quality, not the quantity. So this is what we are trying to work for, and this is a very realistic method. I'm not very sure whether it is applicable for each and every institution or not, but there is a very big pressure on us, and there is narrow margins, and there are some comparative superiorities of the others. When we were carrying out a comparative study with respect to that topic, we looked at Chinese companies and their endorsements coming from state. There is $1.5 billion of public endorsement. But here in Turkey, we don't have such kind of an incentive. Our institutions are working on this. I don't know about the future, but I don't believe that our steel sector will not give up. They will find some solutions, and many of our institutions, companies, have good developments about that. Yes, thank you very much. Last question, that's all. So if there's no further questions, okay. Danyal Bey, I think he wants to learn something. I want to respond him. For Asaf's presentation, he found his hairdressers. So for iron ore and scrap, we have to find someone else out of this audience. These are very challenging jobs. Yes, esteemed guests. For me, at least, it's been a very productive session. Thank you very much, our panelists. And thank you very much for your patience.